Coat season is almost here, if not here already. Today we're tackling a runway-inspired deep dive into unconventional outerwear.
We are going to explore the stunning silhouettes from the fall runways, like the single-piece front coats with underarm godets at Bottega Veneta, cropped trench coats at Chloé, and the abundance of capes.
Join us for the latest autumn outerwear trends, construction tips, pattern hacks, and of course, endless sustainable fashion inspiration.
Hello, and welcome to Threaded Together, a podcast that stitches together home sewing and high fashion. We're your hosts. I'm Tracy.
I'm Rebecca, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing outerwear and current trends. This is our 21st episode, Season 2, Episode 9 for Threaded Together, and we are so excited to have you.
And we're thrilled to have you back listening to us again.
And don't forget to find us on social media at Threaded Together Podcast, where you can see what we're working on and keep up with us between podcasts. Just give us a follow. And if you enjoy listening to our shows, we'd love it if you give us 5 stars and leave us a review on the app of your choice, wherever you listen to the podcast. It helps other people find us. And of course, we always love hearing from you. Jumping in with some current news, it's Fashion Month, so there is a lot. And I have to mention the Alaya show recently put on by creative director Peter Moulier at the Guggenheim during New York Fashion Week. I need to mention it because in the past, we've been highly critical, I would say, of the lack of originality on the runways. And this Alaya show was universally felt to be a triumph. The backstory for the collection is when Spring/Summer 25, they're showing a little bit off schedule, was shown with these pleated spiral gowns. The Guggenheim Museum Instagram account, I think it was, commented on the Alaya page saying they love the dresses, and an idea was born of a collection shown both at the Guggenheim and inspired by it. Apparently, museums can slide into your DMs these days. What made this collection so impactful was the way that Moulier leaned into one idea, and that was the concept of a spiral. It felt simple, kind of like an exploration of a concept through the eye of a student. What if you did 30 different variations on a spiral, say? But simultaneously, that was interpreted through the lens and refinement of the House of Alaya. And I think that juxtaposition of the foundational art and the expert craftsmanship made it one of the most successful collections we've seen anywhere, honestly, in recent seasons. It was such a great collection and absolutely worth watching in motion on Alaya's social media accounts. You lose a lot if you're just looking at still images, but I would definitely encourage everyone, if they haven't, to watch that show.
Your description of it is truly incredible, Rebecca. I'm going to have to give it a rewatch to spot more of the Guggenheim references.
And you've done some interesting fashion things in the past month, haven't you, Tracy?
Yeah, over the summer months, the V&A had a Taylor Swift songbook trail, which was a trail throughout the museum showcasing some of the iconic looks worn by Taylor Swift. Now, I just want to say, I'm not a Swiftie, but my friend's daughter is, and the three of us had a great time following the trail around the museum, and it was basically a mile-long tour with various stops along the way, and it was really, really well done. It was superb.
Wow. That sounds like such a fun exhibit. And we, of course, love a good pop culture and fashion intersection like that.
Absolutely, we do. And then there's also a couple of shows, TV shows that were out shortly that are on my to-watch list. So one is In Vogue, the 90s, and the other is where Thierry Mugler marks the 50th anniversary with a documentary called Inside the Dream Mugler.
Ooh.
And that's out later this month, I think.
I haven't even heard that one was coming out. Where's that one available?
It is in France first, and then will be available in Prime, I believe.
Oh, okay. So I'd be excited to watch a documentary on him. Ex-ballerina as well. Fun fact.
We're really excited to dig into the main topic of coat season and all things coats today. But before we get into that, what have you been working on in the last month?
Honestly, I haven't really been sewing this past month, Tracy. Instead, I was traveling a bit, and then I've been wearing my makes a lot, but I hope I can start into some new outerwear ideas shortly. But what about you, Tracy? I know you've gotten some time to do some sewing.
I did, yeah. My sewing queue was massively disrupted by this incredible animal print denim that arrived in the fabric godmother dream wardrobe that I subscribed to and I've spoken about before. So that arrived in August and it had a pattern from Paper Cut Patterns, the Sierra pants. And it just like literally arrived one day and I went into the work the next day and I saw about 3 people wearing these barrel cut jeans in denim and I took it as a sign that it should definitely jump the sewing queue to make these barrel cut jeans in this like really cool animal print denim and yeah, it was really, really lovely sew and I love the pattern and the fabric and really, really lovely to work with. I'm already planning to make some more barrel leg jeans because they're just really nice to make and fit, really good.
I think that's so exciting because even before we started this episode, leopard print is such a big trend for the autumn winter season, but
Mhm.
also there have been a lot of analyses of barrel trend shape denim, which I thought came in and then went out, but I guess is back in again. Coming up for the next year. I'm so fascinated by the fabric godmother being so on top of it lately. I'm really,
Mhm.
really impressed.
No, it's
You're
really
just
just completely on trend.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I finished a dress that we spoke about last time, and I've got another dress underway and a couple of projects cut out and ready to go. So I did manage to fit a bit of sewing in, which is pretty impressive. I think I'm just really embracing the slightly darker evenings, and I feel guilty sat at my sewing machine when it's really sunny. So it's complete guilt-free sewing, sitting at my sewing machine in the evenings. Yeah.
I also think the cooler temperatures help with being able to turn on the iron as well.
That's definitely true. So today's topic is truly about autumnal sewing. Coats, capes, outerwear.
It's usually reserved as a secondary item when you're building an outfit. But for autumn winter 2024, the runways settled their gaze on outerwear as the focal point of this year's wardrobe. And with the almost overnight shift in weather this September, at least in my corner of Europe, it may prove to be a very practical shift this season as well.
It absolutely will. I am so excited for this episode. I love sewing coats, I love wearing coats, and I love the coziness that you get from wearing coats. We're going to slice this up slightly differently today, looking at the trends and key silhouettes first.
Yes, we are approaching this from a trend-driven perspective because these ideas feel fresh and inspiring. But as always, please keep sustainability in mind. Here at Threaded Together podcast, we view trends as ideas to explore, to learn new things, and to enrich your life experience and wardrobe, not just as an excuse to consume or add new clothing just because someone tells you to or it's new. So, as always, only participate in what really speaks to you, and you will have lots of longevity in your wardrobe, which is why I will personally not be participating in the leopard trend craze. It's just not my thing.
Oh, well, I, however, am continuing to fully embrace the leather print craze, a long standing staple in my wardrobe.
I love that. And one more note before we jump in. This is a very visual episode. So we put together something we're calling little trend guides. They'll be
Mhm.
included in the show notes and potentially in a YouTube edition of this video. We shall see. But I encourage you to take a look at them as we discuss. There are 4 runway looks for each trend with the brand and season listed. And I did my very best to have them not all come from the Bottega Veneta runway show, but they're definitely helpful to understand what we're talking about specifically with these trends. So give those a peek when you get a chance. Pea coats are listed as a major trend for the season. Double-breasted military styles that fashion magazines like L'Officiel say harken back to the 1960s. But of all of the peacoats that we saw on the runways, the notable examples from Bottega Veneta and Jill Sander had a similar construction quirk, a single piece front bodice and sleeve that form a curve from the neck to the cuff that we're calling the curved sleeve trend. This is a shape that can be achieved using a traditional kimono or dolman-style jacket shape, but in order to remove the extra fabric under the arm and create that tailored shape we saw on the runways, it instead needs a gusset or a V of fabric added under the arm in order to allow movement. The effect that this has on that sleeve shape is a clean, uninterrupted curve from the shoulder down through the end of the sleeve. So while yes, we could be discussing peacoats to start us off, instead we're going to discuss how to get this incredible sleeve detail in your coats. This is a much more interesting concept because not only is it a less conventional sleeve shape, it's actually been recurring in other seasons recently as well, such as Schiaparelli and more recently even in Alaya, without the peacoat integration. So I think it's showing just how versatile this construction detail is, independently of that kind of peacoat moment we're seeing.
This sleeve shape has its origins in the shape of the kimono and was explored within the context of American fashion by Charles James in the form of his arc sleeve coat, which is a clear starting point for the construction techniques that we saw on the runway. For all of these secular sleeves with a connected bodice piece, you need to add a gusset under the arm for movement, and that's where, from a construction standpoint, this gets really interesting.
Taking that arc sleeve coat as an example, there's an additional panel under the sleeve that connects to the princess seam line of the jacket, serving both as the gusset and a piece of the sleeve itself, allowing movement without interruption of the curved top of the sleeve.
We see this idea reflected in the Bottega Veneta curved sleeve shapes, where a secondary panel is set in front of the side seam that is part of the undersleeve and connects along the shoulder line in the back.
There's something distinctly Balenciaga feeling about the electrifying green wool version of the curved sleeve that we saw at Jill Sander, which also highlights the time period at which this sleeve shape was incredibly popular, the 1950s. But important to note in this season's runways is the lack of that extra fabric under the arm that would give you more of that dolman shape, as we mentioned earlier. I was attempting to validate for myself that Balenciaga feeling I had by looking back through the book Balenciaga Shaping Fashion. I thought it was really interesting to note that even the Balenciaga sack dress from 1957, while giving the appearance of a seamless connected sleeve without an underarm drape, actually had the same construction we just mentioned of a two-piece gusset that connected to the princess seams and then disappears into a pocket on the front of the dress. So while the name for the shape may be sack dress, the shape that is achieved in also a wool fabrication is in fact incredibly sculpted, much like the Jill Sander coat.
That's such an incredible description of how that is put together. Amazing. I'm gonna go and flick through my Balenciaga book as well now. So this can seem like a really intimidating shape, but once you understand how it works, it can allow you to create a lot of sculptural shapes in your garments.
We love being self-referential on Threaded Together. And so if you want to try drafting a pattern of this jacket in sleeve shape, I would recommend the Fashion Pattern Making Techniques Volume 3 by Antonio Donano, which we also referenced in our episode on getting started pattern drafting. And if you use that book and follow the instructions in the kimono sleeve section, there is a great example that is very similar to what we're describing, but in more of a jacket form. For a more advanced version that has the collar incorporated in one piece as well, so your sleeve, your front bodice, and collar are all in the same piece. There is an excellent paint by numbers drafting pattern in the Haute Couture Volume 1 book from the same series. I've made a modified version of that pattern 3 times. One time I even crocheted to the pattern, and it's just so fantastic and such a great shape and set of instructions to help you understand what needs to be changed on a pattern block in order to create that sleeve shape. If you want a pre-made pattern for this, I think that's a lot more challenging to find. That's because a similar effect can be achieved from a sleeve with a fuller underarm that gives you that more draped dolman sleeve shape without having to deal with a tricky gusset and bust dart. That's one of the reasons why this shape, I think, is so special when it comes to outerwear. As of today, I couldn't find a good pattern for this. I'll try to add one to the show notes, but it's more likely to be a vintage pattern because this doesn't seem to rank in the beginner sewer-friendly shapes that I think more modern pattern companies aim for.
I think I found one, which is the Grace Dolman Quilted Jacket by Kay Dornbier Designs. And this is one that's been on my to make list. So I haven't studied the pattern pieces, but the side view of it does suggest that there may be an underarm gusset. I'll have to dig out the pattern and report back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Capes are an easy and stylish alternative to a coat or a jacket, and they were featured a lot on the runways for fall 24. The Chloé Autumn-Winter 24 runway was one of the first places to really solidify the trend as a must-have of the season, showing high-necked leather and short capes over 70s bohemian ruffles. There's one of them that's like this incredible shawl meet cape. I think that's look 22. It's just, there's a lot to behold. And there were a lot of iterations on the runway, from a classic structured cape at Marni to an open sleeve coat over another cape as a topper at Bottega Veneta. I call this the coat meet cape, an over cape perhaps, all to highlight the versatility of the shape and the different ways it can be executed.
I like that. The coat meet cape and over cape. I think we've invented a new word. I agree, Tracy. I think this trend was explored in so many different ways on the runway with an overarching theme of say goodbye to closed armholes. The spectrum was, like you said, everything from an arm cut open to form a more cape-like shape at Bottega Veneta to a pure circular draped cape at Chloé, and even a draped dolman sleeve shape at Louis Vuitton, blown out to such a voluminous proportion that it's basically just a circle of fabric with a closure for your wrists.
Absolutely. So if you wanted to make a cape, there are a lot of cape patterns out there. One of the first pieces of outerwear I ever made was a cape, which was the Vogue 8959, which provides a variety of lengths and a collar to the cape, and then the cape is made of several panels. But if you wanted a more modern take on the cape, have a look at the Fibre Mood Delma cape, which is one that I've, cut out and ready to go. And that's a short cape with a front storm flap and a pleat at the back and a side seam closure and a hidden button fastening.
I really love that one, Tracy, because I think it's almost like a hybrid of like a trench coat cape, which I think is really interesting. Can't wait to see how that looks when you sew it up.
But to match the circular look of the Chloé cape, have a look at the Iron Passions Harry cape. Or Style Art have the Nell cape, which is an unlined cape with bound edges and inseam pockets.
Oh, lovely.
If you wanted to modify a cape pattern to honour some of the current trends, maybe try playing around with the length of it, adjust the collar to a higher collar, try it with a different fabric, maybe a leather cape. But the most fun thing about a cape is that it is something that if you're feeling confident, you can just draft yourself. It's just like making a circle skirt, but your neck is the smallest measurement. And then the length from your neck down your back to where you want the cape to sit is another important measurement. And we'll link to a tutorial from Indoor Shannon in our show notes, but there are lots of tutorials that are just a Google away. And I'm going to reference the book, Rebecca, that you mentioned earlier, Fashion Pattern Making Techniques Volume 3 by Antonio Donano, because there are some incredible capes in that book that there's a real variety, and you really, really could have lots of fun working from that book if you wanted to design your own cape.
I love that. And I love the idea of playing around with trying to draft your own. So I'm excited to take a look at some of those, Tracy, that you mentioned. Also, for an upcycle take on this idea, if you took a dolman sleeve trench coat, cut open the underarm seam and the side seam, then connected the sleeve to the side seam instead of from the sleeve to the sleeve and the side to the side, you'd have a very interesting cape shape already right off the bat. Just something fun to think about. Another place where I think capes factor in on the runways in a big way is also in this trend of almost over layering. What did you call them, Tracy? The cape it cape? Over cape? The over cape? We're trademarking that. That over layering trend, like the over cape, that can serve as a really interesting starting point to play around with the shape and silhouette of your cape overall. Maybe the cape is a bit shorter and then worn with another piece of outerwear for a more layered look, which was something we also saw in the Chloé runway, or even a caped piece that could be added to another outerwear project to give that dimensional illusion as a cohesive piece. I think the key here is to really have fun with it and try to think about new ways to envision your cape, which brings us to our next trend, classics reimagined. Outerwear was not only the focal point, but was also very much a place for experimentation in the autumn-winter 24 collections. Prada most clearly articulated this classics reimagined trend by sending classic blazers down the runway with the backs replaced by silk waistcoat backs, as if the underlayer of the suit merged with the top layer to give you a new hybrid garment. Prada also sent bona fide ski-style winter coats down the runway that looked as if they'd been caught up and repurposed into traditional outerwear shapes. There were also less literal interpretations of this trend everywhere, from trench coats with lapels blown out of proportion to form collars at Acne Studios, and capes and farm coat / chore coat / cape hybrids at Chloé that made it really hard to pin down what exactly the outerwear style was, but they were incredibly compelling nonetheless. Mixing two contradictory items is a common idea in fashion, but the iterations on this season's runways were much more literal in their presentation, although without crossing into the category of absurdity. Think more double take inducing than surrealist this season.
So if we wanted some pattern suggestions for the classics for trench coats, take a look at the named patterns Isla Trench or the Fibre Mood Martha Trench. But I must say that I really, really like the selection of coats available from Tessuti Patterns, and you could have a lot of fun recreating the runway looks in your own home sewing by mixing and matching patterns that you already have. Think of the patterns like puzzle pieces and just swap one for another, such as the back of a shirt panel in place of the traditional jacket back, or perhaps easiest swapping one colour style for another colour style.
This is also a great opportunity to approach your own closet and potentially find two different pieces of outerwear that perhaps don't fit you anymore or have lost their luster for you, and cutting them together to form really original new ideas. And if that concept intrigues you, I would encourage you to also look at Any Show by the brand Sakai. The brand became known for doing this in a very extreme way, such as combining puffer coats with pieces of blazers or adding traditional blazer details, such as a felt undercollar to a trench coat made of pinstripe fabric. That was from, I think it was spring 23, and it was absolutely fabulous. I didn't add Sakai to this trend board because saying Sakai is part of the classics reimagined reimagined trend would kind of be like saying the sky is participating in a blue trend today, since it's truly just the brand's DNA. But if you find the light version of this trend that's been shown on the runways compelling, Sakai would be a strong candidate for your next runway deep dive.
Okay, I'm going to take a Sakai runway deep dive as my homework.
Next up, we have the trend of having your scarf be part of your coat. Now, having a scarf be part of your coat might not seem like a huge trend on the surface, but last year, a singular coat from the brand Totem that was a simple boxy shape with an attached scarf trimmed with a decorative blanket stitch became the hottest item of the season. And so this year, everyone was on board with the trend. I'd list all of the brands, but it truly was everywhere. So recently, the shape was shown on a shorter coat version, but this concept for me immediately brings to mind the Balenciaga zero waist one seam coat pattern, which can be done as easily with an added scarf piece that's connected at the back of the neck as it can be with an added collar. I'll link this fabulous example from a woman that made this back in 2021. And while she had the scarf be separated in the version that she made, again, the shape really lends itself to the connected scarf idea rather than having a separately attached stand collar.
I'm pretty sure that Bella Loves Patterns teased a pattern that matches the scarf and coat brief perfectly. So that is something that I very much look forward to if if my internet detective skills are correct. But in the meantime, take a look at the Style Arc Wren jacket, which is a perfect match for last season's Totem number. If you wanted to play around with modifying a pattern yourself, take a look at perhaps adjusting the collar on a pattern to turn it into a scarf, or opt for maximum versatility, just make a matching scarf to your coat.
I love both of those ideas.
So those some of the runway looks we touched on today were leather or trench coat fabrics. We couldn't discuss the subject of coats without spending some time on wool. And really, we could have a whole episode on wool. So this is going to be very much a short whiz-stop tour.
I was thinking the same thing, Tracy. I could talk about wool for hours.
There are some incredible properties to wool. It can absorb up to 30% of its weight without feeling wet. It's water repellent, flame resistant, which makes it perfect for outerwear.
There's also a very bizarre yet fascinating thing about wool where it can heat and cool you through the natural properties of the fiber through an actual chemical reaction with water vapor. Excuse my nerdy moment for a second, but I think the article on the science of wool explains it really well. So when exposed to water vapor, once that gets inside the wool fiber, there is a temporary chemical hydrogen bond with the water molecule that is an exothermic adsorption, not absorption, which means it actually produces heat when this occurs. But say you then went into a drier climate with that bonded water molecule and it was released, well, that release of the bond requires heat. So it would actually have a cooling effect in that instance, albeit in both cases, those reactions happen quite slowly. This process, as well as the water absorption factor, explains why wool is the preferred undergarment during war times in the early and mid 20th century and has always been the preferred fabric for seafaring individuals, and even explains why the wearing of woolen garments for skiing in the early 1900s actually does make sense. But of course, what does that mean for your sewing? Well, dry clean your wool. Don't throw it in the washer.
So other fabric from hair fibers can include mohair, cashmere, camel, alpaca, llama, and so on, from the goat and camel families, often blended with wool and other fabrics. And there's really such a range of wool fabrics available, from the really lightweight wools, like a wool crepe that you'd see in a lightweight dress, or a worsted suiting that you'd see made up into a suit, through to textured woolen, the weight of a Harris tweed that you'd see in a jacket, or a coating like a cashmere or camel's hair, or double face wool, which I think really are worth their own mention.
Absolutely.
So double cloth are fabrics which are good on both sides and can be separated into 2 layers. So when you're sewing with these, think about the colours of the fabrics and maybe use a different top and bobbin thread to match either side. Think about your seaming technique and play around with scraps before getting stuck into a garment, because you can really make it a truly reversible garment. There are a couple of interesting guides and write-ups on working with double cloth that we'll link to. One of them is the article you mentioned earlier about Balenciaga. But there are also some great sewing patterns out there that will step you through working with double cloth, including Bella Loves Patterns. There's the Kaya double face coat sewing pattern. And I haven't tried it myself, but having worked with some of her patterns in the past, I'm sure it'll be an incredible. And then also the pattern line has some tutorials and techniques on working with double face fabric, and also a sewing course for the Mulberry coat, which is a double face coat sewing course. And it looks incredible, but it's not something I've done. It's also 250 quid. So
yeah, I'll just reiterate that I think that Balenciaga article has such a fascinating walkthrough on how to use double face fibers, and having I think I cut out that pattern before we start the podcast, Tracy. So I still have it sitting on the shelf in a double face fabric. And I know, and now I need to tackle it. But one of the things I really enjoyed is she also walks you through how to separate and basically curve the seams back into themselves. And it's really well done. So I would definitely start there, and then kind of, unless you have a great pattern that walks you through it, but that's a free resource and it's really helpful. And I think if you even are just looking for tips on how to start using a double-faced fabric, I have successfully now used it a couple of times, but definitely couldn't have without having that instruction on the separation. It's a bit weird. And there's also felted wool, which is often called either felt or boiled wool, where the fabric is bonded together using the felting properties of wool rather than simply woven like a fiber. And I think that can have a really beautiful effect in a coat fabric as well.
So I also highly recommend the book by Claire Schaefer, Fabric Sewing Guide, if you want to read up in more detail on the various types of wool and how to sew and wash and steam and press them, and other fabrics as well. It is quite the guide.
Oh, good. Okay, I might need to add that to the... Thanks for testing that out for us, Tracy. That needs to get added to my queue to find secondhand somewhere. If you want an incredibly comprehensive and highly entertaining read or listen, I would recommend A Short History of the World According to Sheep. I ended up listening to the book, and it was recommended by a friend of mine who is a fiber artist who also aspires to shear sheep as her profession. But you'll learn so much useful and also potentially useless but interesting facts from that book. It's an absolutely delightful experience to read or listen to if you have any interest at all in fabric or yarn or clothing history, or even British history, because there's a lot in there as well.
Excellent.
And then we did have 2 more trends that were regarding special materials. But I want to preface this by saying we aren't going to go too in-depth with them, since really they are standalone topics in and of themselves. But in the context of all of the suggestions we've been making, we had some ideas that we wanted to share. The first one was pretty pervasive on the runways, and we've already mentioned it, and that is leather and faux leather outerwear. From a very vinyl-like patent in a deep bottle green at Chloé to a puffed espresso leather coat at Jill Sander, and everywhere in between, these weren't conventional ways to make a leather jacket. Sure, there were like regular motorcycle jackets of varying types on the runway, but I really think the standouts were those outerwear pieces that you don't typically see in this particular material.
An easy way to incorporate this trend into your wardrobe is to take a jacket pattern that doesn't call for leather and make it using a leather or a poly or wax cotton, something that gives the same effect.
Working with leather and faux leather is not my personal area of expertise, but it's such a specialty fabric that there really are people for whom this is their expertise. So, in order to incorporate this trend into your makes, we wouldn't presume that you should necessarily become a leather expert right off the bat, but perhaps this might spark ideas for you as far as refashioning pieces you already have with smaller modifications in order to make them feel exciting and fresh in your wardrobe. Similarly, the super fluff or fringe trend is also a more complex trend from a materiality standpoint. Many of the garments shown on the runways would require that the fringing be part of what you're making along with the pattern, be it a fringed all over knit cardigan or even a fringe trim.
If you wanted to recreate some of the looks from the runway, there are some vintage fringe patterns out there, such as the Simplicity 9540, which I think we'll have to put a screenshot of what it looks like in our show notes, because you probably would need to do some pattern hacking to make the shape more modern. But you can also search for trims, fringing and frills on your favourite fabric shops, and fringing occasionally comes up via dead stock shops too.
Another idea is to modify an existing piece of outerwear and add fringe instead of starting from scratch. I recently upcycled a faux leather fast fashion set in my wardrobe, and it's amazing how far a tapestry needle and a bit of yarn can go. I've also been testing adding fringe using the same method on a woven fabric to some good success. So perhaps that's something we could test together as another outerwear idea for this autumn winter.
Absolutely. This was a truly inspirational episode. I'm so excited now to get into my autumnal sewing, and I really wanted to make a cape before we started researching this episode, and now I'm certain it's next in my sewing queue. What have you next planned on your to make list, Rebecca?
Well, I also am just so eager to jump into outerwear, but I also am trying to be a little bit more forward thinking in some of my makes. And last year, I sketched out a design to have a dress and a McQueen inspired jacket to do a modern Cruella de Vil outfit for Halloween. Not that I'm ever going to wear it anywhere, but I'd probably actually take the pieces and just put them in my wardrobe. So
Yeah.
I think it's far enough out that I might be able to actually make that happen.
You got enough time. Make it
Yeah, so
happen.
I was trying to bump it up on my list as well as find the sketch. It's somewhere pinned to a wall so I can figure out what I need to make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I look
We'll
forward
see.
to seeing that. Speaking of sketches, our next episode touches on a similar topic, which is how do we capture all of the ideas we have for our makes in order to give them a chance to become part of our wardrobe in the future?
We briefly touched on this concept in an episode that we did during our first season on inspiration. But next month, we'll be going deeper into ways to collect these fleeting ideas, including some of the latest tech Tracy and I may or may not be trying out.
Before our next episode, if you have any thoughts, ideas, or questions for us, you can always find us on social media at Threaded Together Podcast. In the meantime, I'm Tracy.
And I'm Rebecca, and this has been
the Threaded Together Podcast.
We'll see you next time.
Looking forward to our next episode in a month. Make sure you give us the thumbs up on Apple Podcast or follow us on Spotify. You can find more details on what we discussed today in the show notes below or on threadedtogetherpodcast.com. And for more behind the scenes and regular updates, you can find us on all social media channels at Threaded Together Podcast.